Hey guys, welcome back to my sewing room. I'm Kelly and you found me here on Pick and Stitches. And today we're going to be working on the Snow Drift pattern by Fat Quarter Shop for the Sew Sampler for December. So let's jump on in and I'll show you all my tips and tricks. Okay, this month we got a pattern called Snowdrift. This is some lovely brand new fabric from Camille Ross Kelly, which makes me so super excited. I really was excited to sew this one out. There's a little bit more finicky kind of corners that need to come together than some of the previous sew samplers. So we're just going to have to slow down, pay a little bit more attention. If you're a seasoned quilter, you probably don't need any of those tips and tricks. But if you're a beginner, maybe some of these might help you out.
Okay, so we have all of our pieces cut and labeled, and I really highly suggest on this particular one, the Fat Quarter Shop is fantastic at giving us patterns that are typically pretty easy. This one, I feel like you probably need to pull out more of the stops on trying to be really precise, or you're not going to be as excited about your blocks when you're finished. They'll still look great. It'll still be a pretty quilt, but there's a lot more points to line up and make sure your intersections look good. So, all that to say, this one we're going to go a little bit more slowly and a little bit more precisely. So we're going to take all of our pieces. I'm going to grab a different design board and just get the ones for one block laid out for me. In fact, let's do something that will stand out better than that. Okay. So we'll do this one. So we're going to want 4 pieces of A, 4 pieces of B, and 4 pieces of C. Then we're going to have, I don't remember what piece this is. D. It's right here. It's on my board. What's wrong with me? 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to need 4 pieces of D times 2. Okay. So the way that we're going to lay this out is we're going to have D aligned with H. So we're going to have 4 pieces of H. This is the pattern that I chose. It's actually a fig tree fabric that I had in my stash that I thought looked okay. It looks better with this one, but it'll be fine. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This one's going to be attached here. And then we're going to have 4 of our white squares E that get attached here. And then 4 on this end and 4 on this end. So I'm going to get this all lined up the way I want. And I think everybody kind of has a very standard way they like to sew. So when you're sending stuff through the machine, do you often find if you're lining up your rectangle with a triangle or with a square on top, do you go from left down to the bottom right? Or do you start here and go the other way? And so once you've established kind of what your normal sewing direction is, I always like to look through the pattern and see if any of them are the other way, because these are all rectangles. If you were sewing a square on a square, you could rotate it all you wanted, but since this is on a rectangle, you need to make sure that it's lined up the way the pattern shows. So for me, this combination is the only one that doesn't go the direction I normally want to go. This one is kind of different. It's going to make a parallelogram. It's, I can eyeball that and figure it out. But when I'm sewing these 3, I'm going to sew 2 of them the same and 1 of them different. And so I want to make sure that I'm sewing the correct one the other way. So this one is going to actually start on my non-dominant side and come down. So if we're following the pattern, we're going to take our pieces that go across. We're going to draw a line from corner to corner. I'm using this 1/2-inch ruler, but you don't need that. Just a regular ruler, because we're just going to go from one corner to the other. So this is the way I typically sew, upper left to bottom right. But if I put that on this square, that is going to be wrong. So I'm going to rotate this so that I don't forget. And I'll probably just sew these first. Back when we keep them oriented the right way. When we start sewing these, they're going to go from my dominant sides to the other corner, just like I normally kind of want to do. So I'm going to draw my line on the back of my fabrics. We're going to go from corner to corner. And so this way, when I head over to the machine, I know that I'm going to sew this one different. So I'm going to sew it first. So let's head over there and we'll start that process. Okay, so currently I have my regular, I think this is a 6 millimeter foot, which is just shy of a 1/4 inch, but it's kind of my standard foot that I sew with the most. So I'm going to take my pieces of the white background and I'm going to go right on top and I'm going to just chain piece all of these together. So if you're looking at the pattern, this is actually probably the third or fourth step. This is B and E. I'm going to line up with the point of my needle and my red tape here and then sew all the way down. I'm just using a regular 2 inch. I'm using just a regular 2.5 on my stitch length, and I'm using my 60 glide thread that I like so much. And see, my inkling, I naturally want to put it this way. So having this piece here is reminding me that that's not the direction I want to sew this one. So as long as all of my pieces are going the same direction, I'm good. If you need to, though, draw the line because you don't want to cut these the wrong way. See, I wanted to do it again, and these are helping me visually to stay the correct direction. Okay, so now I'm on to my piece D's and my piece C's, and these are going to be the natural way I like to sew. Okay, now we're on to our piece D's and our, goodness, what are these? These are the accent colors. These are piece H. So again, these are going to be the same kind of normal skating direction for me. Okay, and then this last section is going to have white on either side. We're going to make a trapezoid. So you just pick one, do whatever works for you. And just stay consistent with the direction that you're sewing. Okay, so now we're going to pull these last 4 back through. I'm going to move these over here for a minute. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and line all these up so that they're all facing the exact same direction. And just for a visual for you guys, my line is sewn this way. So what I want to do is make an opposite line. So I'm going to just spin that around. And now I'm going to sew from the middle towards this outside corner. Okay, so now we're done with all of our corners. we're going to just cut all of our pieces apart, and then we will head over to the cutting station. We'll take these edges off and then get ready to press them. Now on all of these, we are going to press towards the main block color. So for me, since my background is all white, I'm going to be pressing away from the white, which is pretty standard and pretty easy, and it's going to make some lovely nesting seams. So let's head over to that cutting station. Okay, because these seams are already sewn, the 1/4 inch seam, oops, that's upside down, is not as important because we're just cutting that excess off. We're not actually cutting it to size. It's not going to affect the shape. We want to make sure we have enough seam and not too much. So I'm going to get these lined up with my 1/4 inch line on my ruler. Ish. This one doesn't want to play nice. There we go. And then I'm just going to cut them all at once. And then spin them around and do the same thing on the other side. So I'm just looking at this line of my seam. You want to make sure that you don't cut off your seam. That would be bad, but and you could also cut these with scissors. That's not a problem. I just find that I prefer it this way. Okay, so we'll push these over to the pressing station. Now we'll do the same thing on all of our other blocks. And I would say after you make like one test block here, you might want to do like go through and do all of these. But this particular quilt definitely was a little bit more fiddly, so you might want to make sure before you totally committed to everything that you like how it's coming together for you. Okay, and so for all of these, we are going to press towards that color. So this one I'll flip over because I like to have my color on the top when I want to press that way. I do have steam in my iron. You can hear it. I did starch all of my fabric. I am a starcher. I don't usually find myself to be quite the pinner, but on this quilt, I made the exception. You will be seeing a lot of pinning today. And this is my other iron. I actually like it for when I'm making binding. My Aliso won't stay down. And so if I'm making a lot of binding, I pull this iron out and I just have it swapped back. Keep ironing this other pile. I'm not used to working on such a small surface. Now, I did say towards the color on all of these, and there is this one exception. On this particular one that has the 2 blocks, we're going to press towards the outside. So everything, those 3 will all be pressed towards the color, and these trapezoid shapes will be pressed towards the outside. Okay, so let's get all those under a clapper for just a minute. I did find that pressing was really important on this block. Let's organize better, Kelly. Was really important on this block. So I'm going to let those sit up for a bit before we do the next step. Okay, so now we're going to lay out these 3 pieces that just have the half square triangle on them. And they're going to go with our accent towards the top. And then our little triangle towards the bottom. So we're going to want those 2 points to come together. And then we're going to have this outside part, and these 2 points are going to come together. These 2 will nest, and these 2 are laid out to nest, but I found that I still needed to mark these. So what I like to do is get my 2 pieces together first, and we'll just sew these 2 together first. And after I get this lined up where I want it, then I would take a pin, an actual PEN, and mark where those are going to come together. And I would probably sew from this side because this fabric is lighter. Second. And then I'm going to look at where all this comes together. And you may not be able to see it on camera, but I was just finding that it was really helpful to mark that point. So I know I want to sew over here and leave that white point showing. So we'll head over to the machine and we'll sew these 4 together. Okay, so the other thing I want to do when I switch over to this section is I'm going to go ahead and switch to that seam guided foot. You certainly don't have to, but I don't like to use the seam guide over a corner. Okay, so we'll stitch these together. And then I'll take that apart and just look at it and make sure that you like it, because everybody's machine is going to be slightly different. So we want those 2 to line up and make a straight line. So I'll go ahead and bring my other stacks over here and we'll finish this up. Again, I'm sewing from the wrong side because this fabric is a little bit dark and it's easier to see from this side. I say wrong side. It's just what works. Mark my little point that I don't want to go past. And the reason I'm pinning this first is because I'm not totally sure where that intersection is going to happen until I've got both of those pieces anchored. So I'm going to pin it, I'm going to mark my point, and I'm going to get the needle into the fabric before I take that pin out. And then I'm just going to go to the right-hand side of that dot that I made. Okay. Nope, not like that. Opposites. Okay, so we'll take a peek at all these and make sure we like it before we move on. This is one of those quilts, guys. Looks good. 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 Great. Okay, so now what we're going to do is take our pieces, open it up, and we're going to attach the next side. This side will nest, so it will be really easy to just get it aligned. You can feel it that whole length of the seam. You want to make sure it's really well nested so that your point comes together nicely. And we'll do that for all 3 of the rest of these. Okay, we'll pull it through and take a peek. They look good.
And then we'll head over and press these out. Here I'm just setting the seams and then pressing to one side, and then I'll come back and press them open. Okay, so after I've set those up under the clapper for a while, I'm going to mark some visual lines on the next piece. And yes, a quarter of an inch is a quarter of an inch, but this kind of helps out with someone who's maybe just starting out. If you're a really seasoned quilter, you may not need to do this, but this just helps to give a visual aid on where you want to end with that stitch. So I'm looking at that diagonal line and where it's going to be on that line. And I'm making my point with this little friction erase pen. I know it's kind of small and hard to see, but I want to make sure I'm not making a giant point because then it's harder to be really precise with my sewing lines. So we'll go ahead and mark all 4 of these. Okay, so now that I have them all marked, I'm going to go ahead and build this first quadrant of our block. So those are the corners that I'm going to be the most concerned about. So I'll just flip it over, anchor this corner. And if you're really struggling, this can help a ton. So right where that point is going to come together, I'm going to poke a pin straight through. And I'm going to line it up right where it's going to go into that other seam where everything is coming together. And then once I get it poked through both of the fabrics, I'm going to move it so that that pin is perpendicular to the fabric. I want it to be straight up and down, not at an angle. And then I'm going to pin to the right and to the left of it. And once that's pinned, I'm going to move over to the other side. So now I'm going to do that same corner and make sure I'm right into my seam and a 1/4 inch from the edge, perpendicular, and then we'll get our 2 pins on either side again. Okay, so I'm sewing just to the left, excuse me, to the right of that dot that I made because I want to make sure that I'm leaving that point intact. And then I'm going to pop it open and just take a look and make sure I like the way those corners are coming together. And they look great. So I found that that poke a pin really helps if you're struggling. So maybe give that a try. So now we'll go ahead and do the other 3. Looks good. Looks good. And that one looks good too. Okay, let's go press them open. Okay, so now we're going to take 2 of our blocks and get them oriented the right way. Again, I like to mark this point and this point on the back. So I'm going to spin it around and mark that 1/4 inch. just to give me a little visual aid. We'll do the same thing on the other side. This will be on the trapezoid shape. So we make sure we put it together and we hit all our points. Now here, this side is going to just be in this big block, so you don't have to worry about it. We can go ahead and pin it. And then here on this bottom corner, these seams nest. So you can use that same nesting method, and you want to hit exactly where that 1/4 inch line is. So as long as you're staying nested the entire length of that seam, you'll be fine, even if you're not exactly at 1/4 inch, but you still want to stay on that 1/4 inch section. So we'll go ahead and get the other one ready. Again, you may not have to mark these at all. You may just be able to nest that seam and have great results. But if you're struggling, you might take that extra step. So it's going to be nested from the center all the way out to that tip. We'll just throw a quick pin in it here to hold it, and we'll head over to the machine. Okay, so here's my one with the dot. So I'm going to make sure it's still nested. Drop my presser foot. And then really press those seams together and feel it all the way through to my ring finger on my other hand. Okay, we'll take a peek at it. There's really not a whole lot of corners on this tube connection, so this one should be pretty easy. But right here, you want to make sure you get those 2 corners together. And here's the other one. I just pinned this one, I didn't mark it. So we see that that's still really well nested, and then the top doesn't have anything going on really. And it's probably going to look about the same. It's really just that one corner with the nested seam at the bottom that's the most important. So we'll go press these. Okay, so now we're down to this last seam between these 2 segments. And I'm just going to flip them over and mark my little 1/4 inch. I'm going to hit anywhere that there's a corner, and then this center where the pinwheel comes together, and then this other corner. So we're going to have one going this direction with our accent towards the top, and the other one has the accents towards the bottom. And then we'll flip it up and pin it together. Again, this corner is going to be pretty easy because it's into this big block. So we'll just get it anchored. Then our center here is that pinwheel, so that's going to definitely want a poke a pin. This is probably the most important point on your quilt block. So we're going to make sure we're coming out of the points with my pin and right into the other section where all those points come together. And I'll move it back and forth to make sure I'm perpendicular, and I'll throw a pin on either side. Now, if you're pinning through all the different layers of that fabric, it might get a little bit fat and distorted. So sometimes I like to pin just to the right and the left of that seam allowance. But that front seam allowance, I really feel like is more important because you want to keep that flatter as it comes into your feed dogs and through your presser foot. So here we've got a mark going into a solid one. We just want to make sure we hit that point as we're sewing across. And I'm going to flip this over, and there's one other corner that we want to pay attention to. So we've got that marked at 1/4 inch, and we want to make sure we're stitching right there. So what I'm going to do is poke a pin from the back and push that to the front so that I can see where that exactly is going to come together. And if you sew this from either side, you're still going to have that point that kind of is back and hidden. So I poke that pin through and I'm going to put a little mark next to it, and then I'll pull that pin out and sew it down. And if you've been sewing for a really long time, again, you probably don't need to do this. This is just a tip if you're struggling to get this block to come together. So we'll take it over and stitch it down. All right, let's take a peek. Point looks good. Center looks great. And that bottom looks good. You guys, I'm really pleased with this block. Let's press it and I'll get it on the design wall. Okay, guys, that's a wrap on this month's Sew Sampler. I hope you've enjoyed sewing this out with me. I can't wait to get the finishing touches. I don't have my border picked out. I do not have my binding picked out, nor my backing, but I will. I'll get there. So if you like watching any of these tutorials or any of my other unboxing videos, it really does help a ton if you would hit that like and subscribe. If you know any other quilters that might enjoy some of my videos, I would really appreciate it if you would share it with them. And definitely head over to our private Facebook group. I love getting to see what you guys have on your cutting tables and what you're working on. So until then, guys, I will see you next time.